Hello everybody, I hope you guys are having a great day. So today we are at Koreshan State Park and we're going to focus on some rivers and streams ecosystems and a couple of things about where we are. So this is actually the boat launch at Koreshan State Park, and this area where we are right here is brackish water, and it's also tidally influenced. So if we were to head down the Estero River in that direction, that would take us to Estero Bay. But what we're going to do today is we're going to head upriver and to the Estero River. And Estero River is mainly fed by a lot of small tributaries and drainage coming out of different areas of Fort Myers. But the connection of the Estero River to Florida Gulf Coast University is water from our campus eventually makes its way down to the Estero River. And so where we are right now, this water is brackish, and we are kind of flowing in this direction towards Estero Bay. And just from being here in the past, I'd say it's a pretty high tide right now, but it's an outgoing tide because this current is carrying us towards the Estero River. And so as we paddle along today, I would like you to take notice of a couple of things, right? So as we're on the water right here, primarily what we're seeing around us is different species of mangroves. And as we get closer and closer, or further and further inland, what we're primarily going to see is we'll see more of the upland species. So, outside of the river, you can see, there are some pines, but right next to the water, we're primarily seeing different species of mangroves, and these mangroves are able to tolerate the different levels of salinity. And so as we go further up the river, we're going to have a lower and lower salinity, and we'll see less and less mangroves and more of the upland species growing next to the river. So while we're stopped right there, you're good, okay, let's go. So one of the things I want to talk about while we're stopped right here is this is a white mangrove here, but one of the easiest way to tell the different mangrove species is by their propagules. And so right here, these are the white mangrove propagules. So when we look at our mangroves, we have the red mangrove, the black mangrove, and the white mangrove. And so these are propagules of our white mangrove. All right, so as we're tucked in right here a little bit, one of the things I want to point out here, these are some red mangroves, and one of the distinct features of the red mangroves is they've got these arch-shaped roots down here on the ground. And another feature of the red mangroves is they don't only have the arch-shaped roots, but they actually have these roots that drop down from the lower branches. And so we'll definitely talk more about these on our mangrove field trip, but these ones that come down from the lower branches that you'll probably see along the edge of the river here, these are actually called drop roots, so they're aptly named. And so the drop roots don't actually help stabilize the tree. What they do is they help diffuse oxygen into the upper layers of the soil, and they help break down these mangrove leaves that fall off down here and break down as part of the detritus layer. So I know we haven't talked about mangroves on our field trip cycle yet, but we'll definitely talk about mangroves soon. And we're starting to see the connections from the upland ecosystems to our coastal ecosystem. So the Estero River is a nice example of a transition ecosystem where the freshwater meets the brackish water. So I don't even know if you could see it on the camera here, but again, one of the things, if you guys do enjoy fishing in Florida, I do ask that you be responsible. If you get your line snagged, make sure you actually get it out of the tree. Birds will try and use this to build their nest, and they'll get tangled in it, and it actually causes a lot of damage to birds. So I don't think I got all of it out of the tree, but I got a significant amount. So we made a little bit of a difference. So the one thing I want to point out here, and you probably have seen it a little bit as we've been paddling along, is on the edge here, you can actually see Florida's limestone base. And so we saw this on our campus field trip, but one of the main bedrocks here in Florida is limestone. And when we talked about our wetland ecosystems, we did point out that much of the fresh water in Florida is slightly acidic because of all the decaying plant life that water flows through, picks up those tannins, which gives the water sort of an iced tea color, and also makes the water slightly acidic. That acidic water erodes our limestone base and kind of gives it that porous look to it. And so sometimes you'll hear the term karst topography, K-A-R-S-T, and what that does is that actually describes the shape of the limestone underneath Florida. While I'm stopped here, the other thing I want to point out is probably on some of the mangrove trees you've seen these things hanging down. And again, we'll talk more about it on our mangrove trip, but these are the red mangrove propagule. And these are pretty much a mangrove seedling that develops fully on the tree, and then it will fall down into the water. And these can float for months at a time. And they'll initially float like this. Eventually, they'll start to float like this. But when they land on an area suitable for them to grow, they've got everything they need. They've got moisture and they've got the nutrients that they need to pretty much start growing. Sometimes they'll actually fall, and if they land like this into some sediment, they'll start growing where they've fallen. But otherwise, they can fall in the water like that, and you can see that the current in the water is carrying it away. And that's one of the ways that mangroves actually use these propagules and the currents of the water that they live in to help disperse. It looks like it's stuck right there, but we could give it a little push and send it on downstream. All right, so one of the things you may notice as you paddle along this trail is that there are actually some strange plants that don't quite look native to Florida. And that's because Koreshan State Park was actually a historic settlement by the Koreshan people. And one of the things that they did is they actually brought a lot of plants with them, and they planted them here. And as we know about Florida, right, we've got this warm subtropical climate with plenty of moisture. And so it's actually easy for a lot of things to grow and survive and spread here, even though it's not their natural environment. So Florida does have a lot of exotic and invasive species that shouldn't be here. One of the examples of this is the bamboo that the Koreshan people here brought to the settlement. And one of the things that they have is this is actually a species of bamboo called running bamboo as opposed to the clumping bamboo. And so bamboo is actually very similar to grass. We'll shoot a runner under the ground, and it will pop up 10-20 feet over from the initial stalk of bamboo. So if you were to plant running bamboo in your backyard, all your neighbors would quickly find that they also have running bamboo in their backyard now. So if you do want to plant bamboo in Florida, make sure it is the clumping kind, or it actually just stays in the clump where you plant it. One of the unfortunate things about having this bamboo here is Koreshan State Park does have some of the historic settlements, and people will have to go underneath the buildings periodically to remove the bamboo that tries to grow under the building to prevent this bamboo from growing up and damaging the buildings. So as we paddle along, if you do see some species that don't quite look native to Florida, that's why they're here, because they were brought here by the Koreshans. So as we paddle along through this area coming up here, you'll notice that there are some historic looking houses in the background and on the edge of the water. And so this is actually part of the original historic settlement by the Koreshan Unity Group. And so this was a movement that began in Monrovia, New York in 1880, led by Cyrus R. Teed. And it was a religious group that led commitment to a communal living and a belief that the universe existed inside of the earth. And facing criticism and hostility for their beliefs, Dr. Teed and 200 followers relocated to Florida, and in 1894 built this utopian community here. So the Koreshans, one of the things that they did is they built and operated a store, a bakery, a sawmill, boatworks, printing press, and a machine shop. Education, science, and art also helped shape the community, which produced plays and created elaborate gardens. And those elaborate gardens are why we see a lot of the exotic species here along the river. Dr. T died in 1908, and once he had died, membership of the group actually began to decline. And so in 1961, the 4 remaining members deeded the 305 acres of land to the state of Florida. And so this park actually serves as a memorial to the Koreshan Unity Settlement and is listed as one of the places on the Registry of Historic Places in the United States.
This way?
Yeah, so see the building and stuff?
Yeah.
All right, as we're stopped here, just one thing I want to point out real quick. I've got some red mangrove propagules hanging from the red mangrove. So again, you can see these propagules, they are still hanging on the tree, and when they're fully developed, they will fall off into the water. Other evidence that this is a red mangrove, right? We can see the prop roots in the background, and we do see some of these younger drop roots falling down into the trees. So if you hear the noise in the background of the cars, this is actually 40. So the Estero River does cross underneath 41. And when we talked about the historic settlement in Koreshan, we talked about them having a trading post. And so this was actually their trading post. You can kind of see it through the background here. And so this trading post was an important route on the settlement of South Florida. So people traveled down 41, which is known as the Tamiami Trail, and this was one of their main stopping points, was this trading post. So as we paddle up the river here, one of the things that you'll notice is that there's very few mangroves anymore, and so we do still have some houses and stuff along the river, but very few mangroves. And so the water here in this area is primarily freshwater. And so what influences the water level here is actually two things. So one, obviously, it's the amount of rainwater we have, and so a lot of the runoff from Fort Myers and Estero will end up in the Estero River and make its way eventually down into the Estero Bay. But the other thing is that even though this is primarily influenced by rainwater and it's primarily freshwater here, the water level is actually influenced by the tides. So when we have tide water pushing in and we have fresh water pushing out, those waters will meet, and that fresh water level will actually build up because the tide water is pushing it this way. And so even if it's just fresh water here, right, it's primarily fresh water, that tide, if you have a high tide all the way down into Estero Bay, that tide water will actually cause the water to rise very far up the river here. And so just, as we've transitioned along, it's kind of been like a slow burn ecotone is what I would call it, where we've transitioned from that primarily brackish water to almost mostly fresh water. And so at this point, we're going to see not a whole lot of mangroves anymore. Maybe one or two made their way up here, right, through dispersal by their propagules, but primarily our freshwater species, and still a lot of the exotics and invasive species that we see here. So one of the things I want to mention as we head further up the Estero River and we're onto the state parks property is we do see some houses along the river here. And a lot of times if you're in Florida, you'll hear people talking about, why it's important not to use excessive fertilizer or not to use fertilizer on your lawns during the rainy season. So when you are using fertilizer and it is in the rainy season, the water does run over your lawn, and that excess of fertilizer will end up in places like the Estero River. And one of the things that happens is it puts those excess nutrients into the water, and it causes the algae blooms that we have here in South Florida in the summer months. And so that's why it's actually particularly important, especially if you live close to the water like this, But you shouldn't be using any kind of fertilizer on your lawn, and especially not in the rainy season. So as we paddle along here, and you can tell that the water does have kind of that iced tea color to it. And I know it's a little difficult on camera, but you could somewhat see through this water. And if you watched our campus ecosystem video, you'll notice that this water is not quite as clear as the water on our campus ecosystem. And so this water has flown through some wetlands, and some of it hasn't. Some of it's actually just runoff. And the excess nutrients in the water has made this water not quite as clear as the water on our campus. And so we can see some stuff over here along the edge, right? Some evidence of that limestone base here in Florida. one of the things, this is a great example of what not to do along the banks of a river. It looks like directly above me. I'm not exactly sure what's up there. I saw a sign for a golf cart, so I'll have to look on a map at exactly where we are right here. But we've got sod planted up there, and then right here we've got this bare riverbank here, and you can already see signs of erosion along the riverbank. And one of the things people think, well, it's just dirt, it's natural, it goes into the river, but sediment can also cause sediment pollution. So again, this is not a natural riverbank here, and because this is not natural, we have the erosion. And one of the things that plants that normally live on the riverbanks do for us, one, they stabilize the sediment. So now we've got excess sediment going into the water. And again, that will also filter out pollution and things like that. So I am guessing that there is a golf course up there, because over in the riverbank right there, I actually see a golf ball. So we'll continue on, see what else we find. All right, so we've gone pretty far up the Estero River. At this point, it pretty much just kind of sneaks its way through people's backyards. We've got some roads, some traffics. And I would say most of the water here is mainly just kind of runoff water. And again, if we look down in the water, it is still, you know, it's somewhat clear, but there's some more sediment in it, and there's probably a lot more nutrient pollution in it at this point. And we are in late June right now, so we've had a pretty wet June. And so typically you're not able to make it this far up the Estero River in a canoe. It's usually a lot drier than it is right now. But we have had a lot of rainfall in June, and so we've actually made it up pretty far. And so I'm just going to put the camera on speed film, and we'll just kind of film our way back to the boat dock, and we'll stop and we'll see if we find anything interesting. All right, so we're making our way back to the boat ramp here at Koreshan State Park. So one more thing I wanted to mention in terms of this ecosystem is wildlife. And so along the park, you do see a lot of signs to be cautious of alligators and not to swim. So because this water is brackish, we do see alligators here, but it's not uncommon to see manatees here, especially in the colder months. And I've actually seen a couple of dolphins even further up the river than at this park, but dolphins also come up the river as well. So that was the last thing I wanted to mention as we're here. If you do come to Koreshan State Park and you are interested in renting a canoe or kayak, they typically have some of the cheapest rates around for renting a canoe or kayak. But currently, due to the COVID situation, they aren't renting them right now, so that may change in the future. So I do encourage you to call ahead and see what is available before you try and come here. I know Estero River Outfitters, we paddled by them. They are renting canoes and kayaks right now, so if you're interested in doing that, that's an option available to you as well. And so, you know, we mostly went upstream where we transitioned from a brackish to a mostly freshwater ecosystem. And if we were to head down this way, we would actually transition from this brackish water to continue to be brackish water, would actually have a greater salinity level as we got closer and closer to Estero Bay. So I hope you guys enjoyed the trip and you learned something. So thanks for paddling along for us today. And up ahead, we've got Kobe in the front, so we're gonna give us a wave, Kobe. Thanks for Kobe's camera work and his complaining and lack of paddling. So thanks and have a great day.
Hi.
Anything you want to say to my students?
Be great and be good in school.
All right. Thanks.